Faculty of Education จุฬาลงกรณ์ University to deliver a welcome remark. Please, our dean.
Before to welcome to you for your kind visit to our university this morning, we are delighted to express our gratitude to Professor Dr. Helen Hanna, education consultant and researcher, trainer in writing for academic publication, associate research fellow at the China Normal University, and introduction to publishing in international journals in education. I strongly hope that this month's session will be an enjoyable and productive opportunity for all of us to enhance our knowledge and learn from you. It will be a great time to gain deeper insight as to us broaden our academic and professional circles. I strongly hope that we can achieve goal to publish an international journal article, which you all know. I strongly hope that this month's session will be an enjoyable and productive opportunity for all of us.
And upon this occasion, I would like to present a token of appreciation to our distinguished guests.
I strongly hope that we can achieve goal to publish an international journal which you all know.
And now I would like to stay on the stage and also want to invite for the photo together. Thank you so much for everyone to come and join our session this morning. And along the registration, you may receive an evaluation form. Please make sure that you fill it in and turn it when the session is over. And upon this occasion, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Helen Hanna, our distinguished speaker this morning, to come and present the topic today. And we are so sure that we may have a lot of questions to ask you afterward. So please take this time for your presentation. You may receive an evaluation form. Please make sure that you fill it in and turn it when the session is over. Upon this occasion, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Helen distinguished speaker this morning to come and present the topic today. So while she is taking time to set up the presentation, let me ask you a few questions. How are you today? All right. And may I know who are the undergrad students? Among us here we have undergraduate students. Alright, and how about graduate students? So while she is taking time to set up the presentation, let me ask you a few questions. How are you today? Alright, and may I know who are the undergrad students? Among us here we have undergraduate students. Alright, and how about graduate students?
Where are you from?
So while she is taking time to set up the presentation, let me ask you a few questions. How are you today?
Okay, let us see who down.
Alright, and may I know who are the undergrad students? Among us here we have undergraduate students. Alright, and how about graduate students?
Where are you from?
Okay, good morning again. It's my great pleasure to be here with you. I think this is my fourth time in Thailand. The first time I came was 5 years ago for my honeymoon with my husband. So I have very good memories of Thailand, always good experiences, and I'm sure today will be an equally good experience. Okay. So I think we have some undergraduate students, maybe some master's, doctoral students, and also staff in here, so quite a mixture of people. And I imagine that you have very different experiences with publishing in journals. I know some of you will haven't started yet, but you're thinking about it. I know that for master's and doctoral studies, you must publish something in order to graduate. I imagine for most of you that's in Thai language. But I think what I'll share today is about English language journals in English. But I think some of the rules or the principles will be very similar for other language journals. So even if you're not planning to publish in English, I think some of what I'll talk about today should still be useful for you. So let's get started. For most of you that's in Thai language. But I think what I'll share today is about English, a little bit about me. As your kind professor has already said, I work at China Normal University in Shanghai. As you can see, I'm not Chinese, and I don't sound Chinese. Unfortunately, I don't speak Chinese yet. Very difficult language. But I'm there as an associate research fellow, so I can spend some time on my research. Before that, for almost 5 years, I was a lecturer in education studies, so like an assistant professor in your system, teaching mostly undergraduate education students, many who wanted to become teachers, and also master's and doctoral students as well who wanted to be education researchers. Previous to that, I was doing a PhD, and before that, I was an English teacher. But most of my jobs have been in education. I have published myself, as you would hope, given that I'm talking about publishing today. And some of the journals you can see there. British Journal of Educational Studies is a very prestigious journal in the UK. Education research. Previous to that, I was doing a PhD, and before that, I was an English teacher. So most of my jobs is what it looks like. I know we often access things online these days, but this does exist in paper that you can feel and touch as well. Old-fashioned, old-style. British Journal of Educational. A journal I would recommend, and one I'm on the editorial board for British Journal of Educational Studies. And a note, something to know about international journals is that sometimes they don't say international, but that does not mean they are not international. So a lot of journals that their centre is in UK, it says British, but it's open to all countries. It's not just British research in here, so that's important to know. Another journal I would involved with and recommend is called Compare. If you're interested in international education or comparative education, and actually really any issues to do with education in Thailand would fit with a journal like this. Compare Journal of Comparative and International Education. And journals like these two really want to hear from Thai researchers called Compare. And I know the people who run these journals, and I know that they are passionate about making research and publishing more inclusive of other countries. We don't want to hear only about UK, Australia, USA. As important as they are, it gets a little bit boring when everything is about those countries. We want to hear from all countries. We believe that we need to learn from research in all countries. Because all of us here, I hope, want education to be a wonderful experience for learners. And in order to make that happen, we need to hear research from all different countries. So please take that as an encouragement. We want to receive your publications. So I've published in those regular academic journals. I have written a book recently. I'm very proud of it. It's coming out at the end of the summer. It's on citizenship education, which is one of my interests, so I also publish there. But I'm also very interested in publishing in other places, not only the international journal. I'll be honest with you, not very many people read international journals. That's the reality. We all have to do this for our jobs and for our promotion. But if you really want people to read stuff, if, for example, you really want to influence teachers, that's something I really want to do. You need to think about publishing in other places as well. So I also publish in some smaller publications, much quicker to get published. But I know that people read it because they write back to me and tell me, I used your article in my staff meeting. It was very useful. So just something to keep in mind. There are many places you can publish. You as individuals need to decide who you want to read your work. Who do you want to influence? Who do you want to advise? That's for you to decide yourself, personally. But I know that people read it because they write back to me. In terms of my career, then I run these kind of workshops. And also in terms of research, one of the big focuses in the UK is getting research funding. So I have had some funded projects, mainly around migration and education in South Africa, a country I'm very interested in. So my interests are citizenship education, migration, and also research methods, creative research methods with children. I'm interested in. Okay, so that's enough about me. What about you? We already heard a little bit. So I think some of you are staff or lecturers, maybe postdoctoral, PhD students. I think there are some masters. Definitely have undergrad. Anybody in the wrong workshop? No, I hope not. It's going to be a strange morning for you if you're in the wrong workshop. So I won't be offended if you leave, but you're all very, very welcome. So I think some of you are staff or lecturers. Okay, so some of the goals of this morning. My goals, I guess. I really want to help early career academics in Thailand learn about the process of writing publication in English language journals, in the field of education in particular. So the examples I will give will be from education only. I'm sorry for our engineering colleague, but I hope it won't be too boring for him. So I'll be talking about education journals. And mostly what I'll discuss, my experiences are with qualitative research. So just keep that in mind. I want you to learn about the process, but I also want you to feel more confident and able to publish. For me, that's half the battle. Half the fight is feeling confident and feeling able to publish. Many of us, when we're afraid of something, we freeze. We can't move, and we're too afraid to share our work because we will get criticism back. We will get critique back. I want you to learn about the process. And I have to tell you that is the truth. That is what will happen. But I think we need to accept that as early in our research careers as we can, because it is just a fact. We will receive critique. Many of us, when we're afraid, but hopefully most of the time that will be something that can help us. Very few people in the world can write something first draft and it's perfect. I don't know anybody who can do that, right? In fact, not even top professors. Sorry to say this, but not even top professors can write something first draft and it's perfect. Even top professors get critique. They get feedback on their work. So whether you're starting your career or whether you're at the end or whether you're even just thinking about it, you will receive critique. So the sooner you accept that, the slightly easier it will be. It's never easy to get negative feedback, but you must believe in the process that it will help you to improve your work. Even top professors get critique. They get feedback on their work. So take that as an encouragement. The international community will benefit from hearing more voices from Thailand. So don't be shy. Please submit your work. Slightly easier it will be. It's never easy. Okay, your goals. So this isn't just about me today. You must believe in the process. Your goals, what are they? So during the workshop, I want to give you time to think about what you want to achieve in publishing or just in writing, but also to make plans. So having just an idea is one thing, but sometimes it's really good to write down a plan, to make a commitment, even a small commitment. So I encourage you to take a few minutes now individually, write down 2 goals that you want to achieve today. Something you would like to learn, maybe a question that you have, something like that. Just 2 minutes, write down just private information, I won't ask. 2 minutes and then we'll continue. Okay? Write down a plan to make a commitment, even a small commitment. So I encourage you to take a few minutes now individually, write down 2 goals that you want to achieve today. Something you would like to learn, maybe a question that you have, something like that. Just 2 minutes, write down just private information, I won't ask. 2 minutes and then we'll continue. Okay? Write down a plan to make a commitment, even a small commitment. So I encourage you to take a few minutes now individually, write down 2 goals that you want to achieve today. Something you would like to learn, maybe a question that you have, something like that. Just 2 minutes, write down just one more minute and then we'll continue. 2 minutes and then we'll continue. Okay, write down a plan to make a commitment, even a small commitment. So I encourage you to take a few minutes now individually, write down 2 goals that you want to achieve today. Something you would like to learn, maybe a question that you have, something like that. Just 2 minutes, write down just one more minute and then we'll continue. 2 minutes and then we'll continue. ready? I should explain in case you're curious. I've not been fighting with anybody. I was running at night on your lovely streets of Bangkok and I fell over. So it looks worse than it is, in case you're wondering what I've been doing with my spare time. Nothing silly. Okay. So, I'm not sure if we will have time to cover everything. We'll see how things go. I have some things I think are really important to cover today, but I am also relying on you, as your prof said, to ask questions. I don't know what your individual plans or experiences are, so please ask me questions. No question is stupid. All questions are valid. And remember, when you ask a question, there will be other people who also were thinking the same thing. So don't be shy. There's no shame in asking questions. So we'll start with the basics around publishing, so you know what it's for. Then we'll think about how to start your publication journey. Then we'll think very briefly around how to choose the right journal. I know that can be a big question. Which is the right journal for me? Then we'll have a short break. And then a bit more detailed information. The fourth one is on peer review. If you don't know what that is, that's okay. But it's a really important part of research, publishing, and getting feedback on your work. And then finally, for some of you, if you're doing a PhD, this should be relevant for you, how to turn your PhD chapter into a journal article. That's what many people try to do from their PhD, their doctorate. So 5 different areas. Okay, so the basics. Quickly, with the person beside you or in a small group of 3, think about this question: why publish? And then finally, for some of you, it really helps if we know why we're doing something. So just 1 minute with the people next to you. Why do we publish? Why do we publish? People try to do from their PhD, their doctorate. So 5 different areas. Okay, so the basics. Quickly, with the person beside you or in a small group of 3, think about this question: why publish? And then finally, it really helps if we know why we're doing something. So just 1 minute with the people next to you. Why do we publish? Why do we publish? People try to do from their PhD, their doctorate. So 5 different make a contribution to something that's bigger than ourselves. Yeah, great, yeah. Anything else? There are many reasons why people publish, many reasons why people don't publish as well. Here are some ideas. To exchange ideas. So how can somebody know what you're thinking if you don't tell them, right? On a very basic level. So we want to share our ideas and maybe get some ideas back as well. Building reputation. So that's like your name, the things that people know about you. So maybe for you that's as an individual, if you want to be an academic, you want to build your reputation, your name, you want people to recognize your name and think, they're an expert in Thai education, for example. Or maybe you're thinking about your institution. Maybe you want to build the name of your institution, you want it to become stronger or more internationally known. You want to disseminate or share work on a global scale. So maybe you're thinking beyond Thailand, maybe you're thinking the things that you've learned from your research, you think that would be useful for other countries, maybe other ASEAN countries or further afield. And hopefully you want to make a difference to people's lives. Hopefully that's one of the reasons why we're in education in the first place. We want to make things better somehow. Really important goal. Something to keep in mind. Now this is true for your graduation, but also true in a bigger way. Your research is not complete until it has been published. So many people would say that what is the point, what is the value in writing and doing research if you don't share it, if you don't publish it? And for you in the UK system, you don't need to publish in order to graduate. It's an academic qualification. But for funded research, you must share it. And often the funding you receive, perhaps like in Thailand, is public funding. It's from people's taxes. So in my mind, I'm always thinking, well, my parents paid taxes for a really long time, and now I'm paying taxes. I have a responsibility to share this research because someone else is giving me the money to do it. So your research is not complete until it has been published in some form or shared in some way. Okay, some examples of journals you may or may not know. So Compare I already told you about. Some others, anybody recognize the red one? Asia Pacific Journal of Education. British Journal of Education Studies, I already showed you. How about the blue and white one? Teacher Education. Yeah. So there are some that are specific to your region and some that are UK-based but international. There are some that are the high-ranking ones you would recognize and others more in the middle. There are some journals that are very general, very broad in education even. You can read lots and lots of different topics and different methods in there. And there are others that are more focused on a discipline, like as you see there, teacher education or higher education or multicultural education, quite specific. And sometimes it can be hard to choose the right journal, many different factors to take into consideration. But we'll think about that a little bit later. And you will know other journals that you're targeting and Thai journals as well. So, this is the basic publishing cycle. This is just before you submit a journal article for the first time. Have a quick look and then I'll explain what it says. Many different factors to take into consideration. We'll think about that a little bit later. And you will
no other journals were targeted Thai journal as well.
Just to mention, I will share these slides with you after the class, so don't worry, you don't need to write too much. I'll share it with you.
This is just before you submit a journal article for the first time. Have a quick look and then I'll explain what it says. Many different factors to take into consideration. Just to mention, I will share these.
So, we start with an idea. You have an idea for something you would like to write, or someone has given you advice, I think you should write on this certain thing. So, in publishing, we say the first thing you should do, even before you start writing, is to choose the journal. Why do you think that is? Why do people advise us to choose the journal before we write the article? What do you think? Exactly, yeah. We're thinking about the audience, the target audience, the kind of people that might read that journal. We're thinking about, do we want it to be general audience, or do we want a very specific audience? Do we want, for example, experts in multicultural education? Are these the people who really want to read our work? So that's why they say you should choose the journal very early when you're making the decision. But many people don't do that. But I think it's good to at least keep in mind the kind of journal you would like to write for. Apart from anything else, in writing for journals, people say that it's like joining a conversation. So you're joining a conversation with people who have similar ideas to you, perhaps, or similar expertise or experience. So in the journals, they like to see that you are referencing or citing other people who write for that journal. That gives a very good impression to the editor, the people in charge of the journal, if you are referencing that particular journal. Because it shows that you're wanting to enter the conversation, you want to exchange ideas with this particular group of experts. So idea, then choose the journal, then read previous issues, so that's previous copies of the journal. That gives you an idea of what kind of things the journal is interested in and what kind of people, again, are writing in there. So in multicultural education, are the key theorists or the well-known people, are they writing in that journal? Are you citing those people in your dissertation or your thesis? That might be a useful place for you to publish. And I have to tell you that this does take some time because there are many thousands of journals out there. Many journals to choose from. It takes some time to get to know the journals, to get to know where is the best place for you to write. So, but it's worth your investment of time. It's worth your time. So read previous issues to see who is writing and what are they writing about. Then the fourth one, then you write your first draft, your first version of what you want to say. For some journals that will be 4,000 or 5,000 words in English. Sometimes that can be around 8,000 words. Sometimes they go more than that, 10, 12. But I would say most of the ones that I am interested in are around 7,000 or 8,000 words. That's quite normal. And for us in the UK, 8,000 words is about the same length as a chapter of a PhD. Is also around 8,000 words. So to give you an idea of the size of things. For Thai journals, does anyone know? Do you have a word count or is it number of pages that they require? Pages. So what would be the number of pages? That's quite normal. For Yeah, how many? 12 to 15. And is including references? Yeah. So I think it sounds around the same. How long is a PhD chapter in time? How many pages? You can... No limitation? Wow, that's amazing. How do you know when to stop? Okay, that's funny. All right. So it sounds more or less equivalent, more or less around the same amount of stuff. So after you've written your first draft, use a critical friend. Now, does anybody here have a critical friend? How do you know when to stop? Does anybody know what I mean by a critical friend? Not necessarily a friend, in fact. A critical friend. So we talk about this in writing and in research a lot. A critical friend is not just your friend who's very nasty. A critical friend in writing is someone who is not necessarily an expert in what you're writing, but they have some knowledge and some skills that they can look at your work and give you some useful feedback. So we call that a critical friend. So we talk about this in writing and in research. So for example, recently I was trying to write about something that's a little bit new for me. I wanted to write something about children's literature because I was using some children's literature as a research method. I was using picture books as a research method. And I'm not an expert in children's literature at all. But I had met someone at a conference who we got along well. We got to know each other a little bit. But she's not my best friend or anything like that. But I knew this was her specialist area. She's written a lot. I really enjoyed listening to her talk. So because we had a little bit of a friendship, I sent her my work to get her feedback first. And because she's not my best friend, when she gives me difficult feedback, it's not too painful. If it was my mum, it would be very painful for her to critique my work. But because I don't know this woman too well, and because we're both colleagues, different universities, but on the same level, it was not too painful, and it was extremely useful because she could tell me some of the maybe basic things that I had misunderstood, or she could tell me, oh, you need to read this writer who I didn't know because it wasn't my field. So it was extremely helpful. So then after that, then I was able to submit the journal, the article, feeling more confident that I wouldn't look silly. So finding a critical friend is really useful. It can take some time. If you're a student, often that will be your supervisor. What word do you use in Thailand? I'm not sure. You say supervisor as well? Advisor. So for your advisor, they will be giving you feedback anyway. But when you stop being a student, you don't have the same kind of mentoring necessarily. You might not have someone who's looking, you don't have anyone who is paid to look at your work anymore. So you need to find people who will look at your work for free, essentially, that's what I'm saying. So find a critical friend. After the critical friend has looked at your work, giving you some feedback, the next bit is refining further drafts. That's making them a little bit better. Maybe you don't need to change everything, but some things you change and make better. We call that refining. So already that's a second or maybe a third or even a fourth draft. And this is before you submit it to a journal. So hopefully when you have a draft, you feel more or less
happy with. I think you will never feel 100% happy before you submit something. So don't wait until you feel 100% because it may never happen. Even when you publish, you'll still be like, oh, you'll read it and you'll see, oh, there was a mistake there or something. So yeah. When you feel more or less comfortable, check the instructions for authors. Now, most of these journals that you'll be submitting to are online now. You can find all the information you need online. And for these journals, they are published by a company called Routledge, Taylor and Francis. Very, very large publishing company. So when you feel more or less comfortable, check the instructions for authors. Now, most of these journals that you'll be submitting to are online now. You can find all the information you need online. And for these journals, they are published by a company called Routledge, Taylor and Francis. Very, very large publishing company. So when you feel more or less comfortable. And I say that because even though sometimes it can be something very small, like the spelling style, so British English or American English or whatever it is, or it might be something small in the referencing style that they prefer. Many of these top journals have far too many submissions. They cannot publish everything. So it's a little bit, it's very competitive, in fact, nowadays, extremely competitive. So you really need to make the best impression on the editor, the person who will receive your submission first. You don't want to annoy anybody or irritate anybody by using spelling that they don't like or using referencing style that they don't like. All of those basic things, they can be annoying when you really want to submit your work, you want to get it away off your desk, but it's really worth taking some time to make sure you get some of the basic things right. You really want to submit it and make the best impression and have the best chance of getting through the first level of reviewing. So check instructions for authors and then finally proofread and submit. So checking your language. If English is not your first language, unfortunately you have a little bit of extra work to do. But if you can, if you know a native English speaker, it really helps for them to look at your work before you submit. Unfortunately, publishing is not exactly an equal or a fair place, and if the language is not good or if it's difficult to understand, it puts you in a difficult position. So it's really worth, if you have a native speaker friend, or even sometimes people are using companies now to proofread the work. But just also be careful with that because there are good companies and bad companies. And for me, because I'm working in China, I see a lot of writing from English as a second language. And sometimes even when my friend shows me the work that went to a proofreader, still it's not perfect. It's not as good as it could be. So something just to keep in mind. I won't tell you must send it to a proofreader, you must pay a company. It's up to you, but bear in mind that the language really is very important. Any questions about the publishing cycle so far? Sometimes even when my friend shows me the work that went to a proofreader, still it's not perfect. It's not as good as it could be. So something just to keep in mind. For these kind of journals, and these are like top level journals. These are SSCI journals, so the top level. But for many other journals as well, the submission is online through a sort of online piece of software. It's worth to get used to that, to familiarize yourself with it. not too complicated, but many of the journals use the same system for submitting online.
Top level journals, these are SSCI journals, so top level.
Okay, let's move on. So those are the basics around publishing a journal. So starting your publication journal, so it's very unlikely that the first journal article you write, you submit, it gets accepted, and then that's it. It's extremely unlikely. There are many things that you can do to help increase your chances of publication. And there are many things that can stop you from starting writing in the first place as well. Remember, it's a very personal thing. It's about personal motivation and personal goals. So let's think about some of these questions. How confident do you feel about the writing process in academic journals in English? So 1 is not confident at all, and 10 is very confident. How confident do you feel about writing for publication in English from 1 to 10? Okay, you can tell the person beside you. 1 not confident, 10 very confident. Do you feel about the writing process in academic journals in English? So 1 is not confident at all, and 10 is very confident. Okay, any 10s? Anyone feel 10 out of 10? Very confident? Any 1s or 0s? When I speak to people in England, in fact I did a workshop last week at a conference, many of the researchers were English native speakers. They put their confidence level at about 4 or 5. And they're native English speakers. Yeah, so it does give you an idea. How confident do you feel about the submission and reviewing process for journals? 1 to 10? Perhaps even less confident in the writing. Okay. Maybe a slightly easier question. What, if anything, do you enjoy about writing? Just writing in general, writing in any language. Please share with the person beside you. What do you enjoy, if anything, about writing? And reviewing process for journals. 1 to 10. Perhaps even less in writing. Okay. Maybe a slightly easier question. Oh dear, very silent room. Does anybody enjoy anything about writing in any language? Anything that you like or enjoy about writing? Yes. Yeah, something like meaningful. Yeah, you feel like you're doing something with value, writing. Yeah, oh, very nice. Yeah. Anybody else? For writing anything, what do you enjoy? Anybody, Prof? Anything you enjoy about writing? Nothing? I'll tell you, this is going to be a long and painful career. If you can't find something that you enjoy. More seriously though, for me, I'm not someone who naturally enjoys writing. I find it a very difficult process. I've always been like that. But I knew that I needed to change my attitude a little bit. Because a career is very long, right? And we know that we have to write, always have to write to communicate through writing in some form. So for me, I needed to change my attitude a little bit. So for me, I started to read
books about writing. Not only academic writing, but just writing in general. To try and develop some kind of satisfaction or enjoyment in writing. And if your English language skills are strong, there's some recommendations I'll make at the end, something that you might want to read to help you find some enthusiasm, I suppose, for writing. I think if we enjoy something, we're more likely to do it, right? We're less likely to avoid doing it. We're less likely to procrastinate. That means to put something off to a later time. So it can take a long time if it's not something that is within you, but worth taking some time to think about it. What can I enjoy from writing? How can I find some satisfaction? Okay, you're going to find this one much easier. What, if anything, do you dislike about writing? What do you hate about writing in any language? Please share with the person beside you. What do you dislike? There's no shame in being honest about it. Okay, we're going to find this one much easier. What, if anything, do you dislike about writing? What do you hate about writing in any language? Please share with the person beside you. What do you dislike? There's no shame in being honest about it. So what do you dislike about writing? What's difficult? Why was it difficult for you to think of something that you enjoy about writing? Why do we find it just so difficult? I think. So what do you dislike about writing? What's difficult? Why was it difficult for you to think of something that you enjoy about writing? Yeah, really time consuming. And you need to read a lot sometimes in order to write a little bit. Yeah, okay. So time consuming, and I'm sure you have many other things in your life that you need to do, right? Yep, so it's very easy to say, no, I'll do the writing another time. I have other things to do. Yeah, thank you for your honesty. Anything else you don't like about writing? Why is it so difficult? Yes. Yeah, really time consuming. And you need to read a lot sometimes in order to write a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So is that about finding the information, do you mean? Or do you mean, can you explain a little bit? Both. So finding the information can be difficult, and technically actually writing the references can be difficult as well. Yeah, definitely. Many people say that, for sure. Yeah. What else is difficult? What do we struggle with? So is that about finding the information? Yes, please. Can you explain a little bit to say no? So finding the information can be difficult, and technically actually writing the references. So about finding the right language, type of language, in whatever language it is, Thai or English, yeah. Because there are many different ways you can say the same thing, right? I'm sure Thai is similar. In English there are many different words that you can use, synonyms, that basically mean the same thing. But there's a slight, small difference that you need to get right. That's when the native speaker can really help you. They can tell you that word is not quite right, but this one is much better. So getting the language right is really important. Even if you don't want to share today, I really do encourage you to think personally, what are the things that are stopping you from writing? What are the things that make you want to do something else? Because if you bring those to mind, if you're honest with yourself, you can do something about that, and you can make the plans that you want for your writing as well.
Okay, so some things you can do to help yourself, to give yourself more chances that you will be successful when you publish in academic journals. There are some of the things that you can do, other places that you can publish. So I'll explain to you. The way that research works in the UK, USA, Australia and some other countries is this. Academic journals, conferences, membership of research organizations and international networks are all linked together. So for example, this journal is linked to an academic organization called the British Association for International and Comparative Education. So they make money from this. Remember, publishing houses make a lot of money. There's a lot of money. You won't get any money, but some people get a lot of money from it. British Journal of Educational Studies is related to the Society for Educational Studies as well. They have a conference every 2 years. They have a conference every year. Same people in the committees are publishing in these. They're quite interconnected, all linked together. So, in order to get other types of experience in the research world, this will make it more likely that you'll be successful when you submit articles to journals. So if you can somehow go to conferences that are linked to particular journals, you will have the opportunity to meet the kind of people who publish in these places. Now, that doesn't guarantee that when you submit something it will be successful. There are no guarantees. But it means that you will have the chance to get feedback, to get comments when you make a presentation from the kind of people that write in here. Now, it can be quite tough, quite difficult to hear those questions or that feedback, but it's better to get that when you're giving a presentation than submit a journal article and then be rejected. So some things that you can do. So you can write book reviews. You have this in Thai journals. You do book reviews. Yep. So particularly this one, British Journal of Educational Studies, has a large section. Yeah. You can have a look at this later. But in the back it has a review section where they have book reviews of quite a number of books in education. So although it doesn't have the same value for promotion, I suppose, academic promotion, to do a book review, it's useful because it shows that you are engaged or you're active in your area, and also you get free books. Now, academic books are extremely expensive, especially to get a hardback book, a really nice book. So this is a good way they send you the book for free if you write the short review. So very useful, especially if you're a student. So book reviews are useful. Journal article reviews, so reviewing somebody else's work for a journal, also useful. Rehearsing the draft article at a seminar or a conference. So remember, the conferences and the publications also are linked. Going to conferences, of course, is about networking as well. But mainly, if you're doing a presentation, the idea is that you're... So book reviews are useful. Journal article reviews, so reviewing somebody else's work for a journal, also useful. Rehearsing the draft article at a seminar or a conference. So remember, the conferences and the publications also are linked. Going to conferences, of course, is about networking as well. But mainly, if you're doing a presentation, the idea is that you're similar, like balance. So you shouldn't have 5 pages of conferences and then like 3 publications. If an employer is looking at this thinking, why are you going to do, what are you doing at these conferences? Yeah, try and make it a little equal. quite quickly, and they can say yes or no. If they say no, they might suggest a different book that you could review. And then, as I said, they'll send it to you for free. They'll post it to you. So some of my Chinese colleagues have started doing that, and they've posted really, really nice, expensive books that you don't need to give it back at the end. You get to keep it. So it's very important to know. And particularly if it's a book that you really want to get, but you don't want to spend the money, then I think it's a really good tactic, a really good approach. I put a few emails there. So the book reviews editor for Compare is Amy North at UCL in London. So you can just contact her directly. And for BJES, it's Tom Harrison, and the email address is there as well. Free books. Okay, conference papers, already mentioned a little bit. Conference papers are a good way to try out, practice your ideas and to gain feedback. It can be a little bit scary at the start, of course, especially if you're a student. But there are many conferences that are organized especially for students or for early career researchers. And generally they are supposed to be supportive places. But do bear in mind in academic conferences that people are expected to ask you questions. So don't go and think, oh, nobody will ask me. At international conferences, people will ask you questions. But it's extremely important because it does make you think, even if it's challenging. It does make you think and hopefully will improve your work as well. It can help you to get to know and be known by a group of like-minded people. Academic work can often be quite lonely, I would say. Even though you're working with a group of people, but you might have your special interest. And it can easily be the people working with you are not interested in that thing. You can feel a little bit lonely. But if you find a conference on your specialism, you'll meet other people, maybe from different places, different institutions, even different countries. Make that connection, that network can really help you in your career. So choose your conference carefully. Do you want to go to a general education conference? I go every year to the British Education Research Association conference. That's our main education conference in England, in UK. So that's very general. Or you can go to a niche or a specialist conference on your particular topic. That's up to you, and it might depend on how much it costs as well. Often a conference paper will lead to a full publishable article. So I would say it's quite a good use of your time, quite efficient. As I said, if you try and link conference paper with writing something for publication, if it's the same thing, it's a good use of your time. Because for the conference presentation, you must spend time on that, so it's better than to write something from that. And there are some conferences, just to let you know, as I said, the BIRA conference I go to all the time. ACFIAT conference is something that dear Chawin is going to in September. That's more about education and development, if you're interested in international development and education. That's on every 2 years, also in England. What are some of the big conferences in Thailand on education? Have you got any conferences that happen every year in Thailand? Is there like an equivalent to BIRA? What are the names? Have you got like a Thai Education Research Association or... Who? Say again? Educa, what's that? Yes, in Thailand. Yeah, okay. Has anybody been to an academic conference before? Who's been to one? A few people. Anybody thinking about it? Maybe considering it? You really should, if you can get the money, you really should. Really nice opportunity to go outside of your comfort zone, your friendship zone, meet other people. Sir, can you tell me what conference did you go to? Ah, okay, yeah. Are there quite a lot of TESOL conferences in Thailand? Ah, okay, yeah, so annually, yeah, So something worth doing some research on. Find what conferences are available. If you're a student, find out if there are some student conferences happening. Be brave, put yourself out there, share some of your ideas, and get extra feedback. Because your advisors can give you some feedback, but it's really useful to get a different perspective as well. Okay. Going back to that idea of a critical friend or a mentor, there are different people that might be able to help you. So it can be an advisor, PhD supervisor, or master's, or undergraduate, whatever level it is. Might be a colleague in the same or a different field, different research area. Could be someone from a different country with a different perspective. But it should really be somebody that you can trust. Someone you know will be honest with you, but fair as well, that won't treat you badly. All of these things can help you write things that will be more likely to be published, so that when you're ready to submit, as I said, you feel in a much stronger position and you can feel a little bit more confident. Okay, any questions or queries? Anything you'd like me to repeat, to talk about again? Okay, we'll do one short bit more and then we'll take a break. So choosing the right journal can be quite difficult, can take a long time. There's some journals that ask for money. They want you to pay money to publish in their journal. I would say most of the good ones will not ask you for any money. So, you need to know your audience when you're choosing the journal. You need to know who will read my work, or who do I want to read my work. So something to keep in mind. A journal article is not a magazine article. It's not a book manuscript. It's not really long, or your PhD or master's thesis. So, can you remember what I said earlier? Do you write an article for a specific journal, or do you just find any journal for your article? A or B? A, write an article for a specific journal, or B, find any journal for your article. You can share with the person beside you, 10 seconds only, and then I'll ask A or B. So A or B? A, write an article for a specific journal, or B, find any journal for your article? What did I recommend earlier? A. Yes, if possible, A. But still the minority do that. 30% of authors write for a specific journal, 70% write the article and then panic. They go, I need to find somewhere for this article. Ideally, you should be writing for a specific journal, because the issue is you need to, if you change your mind and move to a different one, you need to change a lot because it must fit that particular journal. And sometimes it can be that you submit an article and it's really good, but they will reject you because it just doesn't fit that particular journal. That does not mean that it's a bad article. It just means that it doesn't fit that journal. To try and write specifically. So as I mentioned earlier, it's worth keeping in mind that you're joining a conversation with other contributors, other writers, ideally. So some things you can do to find the correct journal for your publication. You should research the journals in your field, in your area, in your university library, looking at publishers and journal websites. Talk to your peers, your colleagues or fellow students through social networks. Pick your type of journal, get some advice from your advisors perhaps. Do you want it to be general or do you want it to be niche, specific? Read the aims and scope of the journal. That's also normally on the left-hand side on the online version of these journals. It tells you what is the aim of the journal. All journals have specific aims, and scope is like the breadth, how general they want it to be. What exactly are they interested in? Are they mostly interested in education policy, for example? Are they mostly interested in primary education? Are they mostly interested in TESOL? Or are they much broader? Are they mostly interested in education studies in general? Are they mostly interested in comparative or international studies? Read the aims and scope. A good starting point, if you have been using articles in your own work, if you've been referencing some people, is to see where those people have published. Look in reference lists in things that you have been reading. Where are those articles published? Perhaps you'll find some in Compare, for example. So ask the right questions and get the right answers. So this is where the networking thing is important. Who is the editor? Each journal will have one or two editors, a person in charge of the journal, essentially. For academic journals, they'll normally be an employed academic, someone who is employed at a university. So for this one in particular, it's a guy called Professor Gary McCulloch, also at University College London Institute of Education. He's an historian of education. So for me, personally, I got to know him through being a member of the Society for Educational Studies. And then from that, then I knew that he was a nice person. I had a good feeling from him. And because of that, then I got more involved in the journal and I started to write a lot more. So those things can take time, like any good relationship. But it really helps if you're going to places where these people are. So the face-to-face is really important. Email is okay, but meeting someone face-to-face really helps, I think, develop collaboration. So who is the editor? Who is on the editorial board? Now, the editorial board, normally it's like a committee in charge of the journal, make some decisions. And normally in the paper copy, you can find it on the inside of the first page. And you can also find it on their website online. So for me, if there's a journal I'm interested in, I'll often look at the list of people and see if there are any of those names that I have also referenced or cited. It's just a smart way of working. At least that way I know that I'm joining the conversation. Because the people on the board can often be the people who will review your work. Now, they won't see your name, you won't know who is reviewing your work, but it just really helps a little bit. Academics, we often say academics have a fragile ego. So it means that if you say small things, it can make them feel really amazing. But if you say some negative things, then they feel really bad about themselves. So for me, I have to say, on a personal level, if I have a piece of work to review and they have cited me, they've referenced me, I'm going to be pretty happy about that. So worth keeping in mind, just be smart about it. So know who the editor is, know who's on the editorial board, who is the publisher might be useful, who are the authors, who's writing in those journals, who is the readership, who is likely to be reading. Now that's something that's a bit more difficult. You don't know exactly who will read, but you might have a general idea of the type of person who will read. So for this one, for Compare, absolutely you will know it will be an international readership. You know that the people reading your work will have an international perspective, let's say. They're more likely to be open to hearing about practices in different countries, that type of thing. Let's see. Other things to keep in mind with journals, most of them are online now. There are a few that are still only in print and paper copy. But something to keep in mind, especially for your university requirements. What do they require? Does it need to be in print, paper as well as online? Can it be online only? That's up to you. Worth bearing in mind that many of these journals, because they have so many submissions, often there is a delay in publishing in the paper copy, a backlog we call it. So there's a delay. But if they accept your article, it will go online first. But that can be maybe 2 years before it goes in paper copy. But I don't know what your university regulations are, but sometimes there's a bit of misunderstanding about the value of the online version. For this, if your article goes online, that is published. That is just as good as when it's in paper copy. So keep that in mind. I know in China, some universities don't accept it when it's online version. But the journals, for them, it's been accepted. It's online. It's very valuable. Unfortunately, we need to think about rankings nowadays. So we talk about the impact factor. SSCI, for example, Social Sciences Citation Index, you may be heard of. Scopus, perhaps you've heard of, all of that kind of stuff. It's not something I feel very comfortable with personally, but it's the reality at the moment. So you might be thinking, what ranking does the publication need to be in for me to graduate? Or what do my employers require from me? Different universities have different policies. In the UK, SSCI and Scopus is not quite so important, but I know in China for my new job, that's the only thing that matters. It doesn't even matter if your research is terrible. As long as it's in an SSCI journal, that's all that matters to them. So for me, I have to keep that in mind. There are certain things I must do for my job, but there are other things that I do for myself and my own satisfaction, my own goals. So you have to make those decisions for yourselves. The next one, the peer review process. How long does it take to get feedback, for example? Now, most of the journals, they don't tell you exactly how long it will take, but as you get to know some other people, a good network, you can ask, you can share information. If you have a friend or a colleague or advisor who also submitted to that journal. You can ask them, how long did it take to get feedback back? We'll talk about the peer review after the break. Submission process and speed, and open access. Has anyone heard of open access? Open access. Something we're talking about a lot these days. As I said, most of these journals, the way that journals make money is that university libraries and individuals pay to get subscription. They pay for access to these journals. This means that if you're a student or a member of staff, you don't need to pay. But the journals, the publishers themselves make a lot of money, serious money, in fact, out of these. But many journals are starting to change a little bit so that they're open access. That means that anybody can access the information. And partly it's financial, and partly it's to do with this idea that if research is publicly funded, then it should be accessible to the people who have paid the taxes. So it should be accessible to all people. So I don't want to talk about that too much, but I suppose it's just worth knowing that I tell you the basics today around publishing, but those things will change over time, and the requirements for you as students, but particularly if you become academics, those will also change over time as well. But for now, this is the process that we have. Yeah, citation stuff. You can look at that maybe at home when I send this to you. Okay, so we've had stuff around the basics of publication. I've given you some things to think about in terms of how to start your publication journey, and some advice on how to choose the right journal. We'll take a 10-minute break, if that's okay now, and come back and we'll look at peer review and turning PhD chapter into journal article. Okay, go get some fresh air. Okay, so in the first part, we looked at the basics around publishing. We thought about how to start your publication journey and the kinds of things you can do to make it easier for yourself when you try to publish in an international journal. And we thought a bit about how to choose the right journal for you. Now I want to look at two big topics, I suppose. Number 4 about peer review, how you get feedback on your journal articles. And also lastly, how to turn a PhD chapter, or indeed part of a master's, you can apply it here, into a journal article, thinking about how they can be different. So the peer review process, I would say this is the process that causes the most anxiety and stress for people when they're trying to publish. The most complaints and the most questions come around this area of peer review. So we already looked at the publishing cycle. You go through these different steps. Once you have proofread and submitted your article, probably online, then you start the peer review process. A peer is someone who is like your colleague or fellow student. A peer, it gives the idea of equality. It's someone you have an equal relationship with, your peer. So what is peer review? Well, it's a process that allows an author's research, so you as authors, to be evaluated and commented upon by independent experts. They're independent experts because they're not necessarily the person in your office, or they're not someone who needs you in any way, or they're not part of your research project, for example. It should be someone that's outside of you, external to you, independent expert. So a process that allows your research to be evaluated and commented upon by somebody outside. It can take different forms. I'll just explain the main one. Double-blind review. So you know, blind means that you can't see. Most international journals like these ones use the double-blind review. That means that when you submit an article, the person looking at your work, reviewing it, they will not know your name, and you will not know their name. So that's why it's double blind. You're blind to the name and they are blind to your name. The idea behind that is that it's meant to make journals more equal, more open to everyone. So in theory, for you, if you're starting your career or if you're a student, you should have the same chance as someone who is at the end of their career, as a top professor, for example, because you don't know anyone. So you can't have that bias or negative influence. Because often, I mean, it's sort of human nature, but if we read something and we see the name of someone very well known or famous, we will automatically be expecting something really good. And sometimes it can be confirmation bias, if you've done that in psychology. You think you're going to read something good, and then you imagine that it is good. You're reading it, you think it's better than it really is. Equally, maybe you read something and you see that it's from someone, you don't know the name, or maybe you know them, maybe you don't like them, and you read it, you're expecting something bad, and then maybe you give it a negative review, and that's not fair either. So the idea that it makes, the process is not perfect at all, and sometimes if you're reading something, if it's in a very specific or niche area, and there are only a few scholars working in that area, maybe sometimes you can guess, oh, I think Professor so-and-so wrote this. But most of the time, you shouldn't be able to guess if you read something. And equally, if you submit an article and you get the review back, you should not be able to guess. And when it's international, it's a bit easier. It's very unlikely that you will know who is reviewing your work. So overall, I think that that's a very good thing. It creates a more equal platform. So this is how the process works. Sorry, the bottom is a little bit light. If you take a moment, have a look at that, and now I'll explain it. So we start with the top left, the editor of the journal. So the person in charge of the journal receives your manuscript. That's your submission, your article. You call it a manuscript. So they receive it into their email. Then they make a decision at that point, first by looking at it quite quickly. Sometimes they make a decision immediately to reject. Sometimes, if there are very obvious mistakes. So if they just can't read the English, that would be immediately reject. If it's really, really poor. Or if it's on, say it's an education journal and they received an article about, I don't know, physics or something. It's just not, doesn't make sense. And unfortunately, editors tell me that this does happen quite often because people are quite desperate. So they really need to get something published, so they think, oh, I'll just send it anywhere. It's a waste of your time. Don't do that. So the editor receives a manuscript. They'll make a quick decision based on the language or the topic. But most of the time, then they will send it to people to review the work. Often it will be people that the editor has got to know over time, people that they know are experts in this area. So if you're interested in mathematics education, for example, in this one, Gary, if he knows some people in mathematics education, he'll contact them and ask them, would you be willing to review this piece of work? Normally with reviewers, at minimum, it will be sent to 2 reviewers. Minimum. 3 is also quite common. Recently I had something I wrote with a Chinese colleague and we got 5 reviews. That's very unusual. Probably not a good sign either, but however. 2 or 3 is quite normal, and those people also should not know each other. So generally it's expected if you're working with colleagues, something you shouldn't really talk about. You shouldn't really discuss it with other people. It's not an official rule, but sort of unspoken rule. You should keep these things confidential. So send out to 2 or 3 reviewers. Normally the journal will give them a deadline to give the reviews back. That can vary enormously. The journals that I write for, normally they give me around 2 months to read and give feedback, 2 or 3 months perhaps, but it can take a lot longer. Something worth keeping in mind, certainly with these kind of journals from UK publications, is that people are reviewing for free. They're not getting paid. The editor will get paid a small amount, not a massive amount, but all the people involved in the reviewing are doing it as part of their service in their work. So it can be very frustrating because the reviewing can take a long time, and maybe you're waiting, you need it to graduate, or you need it for a promotion, or you need it in order to get a job. But you need to leave as much time as possible, because these people who review your work, essentially they're doing you a massive favor. They're doing work for you for free. The idea, of course, is that then you should also help in return. So they review your work. Later on, if you're asked to review something, you have a certain responsibility then to review other people's work. So keep in mind that people aren't getting paid in this. So it's gone to the reviewers. They've given their feedback. Normally for me, if I get an article, I write maybe 1 page of feedback. I give an explanation of how I understand the article. I'll normally highlight the things I thought were very interesting or good, and then normally I'll make a list of suggestions, or if there are major problems, I'll highlight those as well. But personally, I try to be very fair because I want to get fair feedback to me. So it's like a cycle, reciprocal, we say. I hope that if I give helpful feedback and being very kind, then I hope I'll get kind feedback. And normally I do. There are only a minority of people give very negative, nasty feedback. Very small minority. Most people are trying to help you. So after you get the reviews back, you will receive a decision. A, B, C, or D. So A is accept. How common, how frequently do you think that happens? Accept immediately. Bless. Almost never. Almost, especially for a top journal. Almost never. Even for the top professors, that's what I mean. Even for very experienced people, there will always be some way in which you can improve. So do not expect A. Forget about A. That's not going to happen. But that's okay, because it's normal. B, minor amendments or minor changes. Also very uncommon, not very often, not very frequent. Major amendments, C, very common. Yeah. So it's a bit unclear the difference between minor and major. I suppose minor could be things around spelling or basic structure. Minor could be some gaps in the literature, maybe some things you haven't mentioned that you should. Major would be more around your analysis of the data wasn't broad enough or wasn't in-depth enough. So as I mentioned earlier, my specialism is in qualitative research, which is very popular in the UK, and using more creative methods. There's a big interest in research methods in UK and some other countries. So for me, a major amendment might be that I didn't analyze my interviews in enough depth, or I didn't. Normally with interviews, when you're talking about the experiences of another person, you're expected to give a lot of analysis, a lot of description, a lot of thinking about what did they mean there. And if I'm just showing a very simple way, oh, they definitely meant this when they said this, someone will comment and say, well, how do you know that? I need to explain a bit more. I need to give more examples from that particular interview of where they talked about that experience, for example. So that would be something I would get back. Or if they think that the theory you're using doesn't fit with the findings, that would be a major amendment. As you imagine, that would take a lot of time to change. And then D, unfortunately, does happen, reject. But as I mentioned, sometimes you will be rejected just not because your research is not good, it's just that it doesn't fit that journal. So there can be many reasons why you might be rejected. But I encourage you, if you get C, major amendments or something similar, personally I would consider that a big success, enormous success, because if they are willing to give you the opportunity to make changes, that means they think that your research is good, that it's worth it. but you just need to think about some other things. When you get major amendments suggestion back, that means your article is already in the system and they're willing to look at it again. So major amendments is a good thing. So you got your feedback, then you have, it might surprise some people that you actually have a choice at that point. So if someone tells you to change lots of things in your article, you're not obliged to change everything. That might be surprising to you. But if we're thinking about this process as peers, so equal relationships, you can decide if you want to make those changes or not. And actually, you don't have to make all the changes in order to get the paper accepted. But you do need to explain, if you decide to not make a change, you need to explain why you didn't. That's perfectly acceptable. Sometimes you'll get reviews from 2 or 3 different people, and because these things are very subjective, there can be a lot of bias. People can sometimes give you confusing or conflicting opinions on your work. So somebody might say, yes, this part of your literature review was excellent, very in-depth. Someone else might say, no, it's not in-depth. There are lots of people that you didn't mention. So you're in a very difficult position there. But over time, you do get a little bit more confident about deciding, yes, I'll make that change, but no, I don't want to make that change because this is my work and I understand my work better than this independent person. So it does take time and a bit of confidence, but it gets a little bit easier when you feel more confident in your work. And for me, especially with qualitative research, because a lot of it is through interviews and meeting with people and getting to know people, that makes me feel more confident than an external or outside person. That makes me feel, well, I was there with that person. I heard them talk about that experience. I heard that teacher say how they struggle with their mental health. I heard that teacher say how excited they were when the children understood how to do maths better. So I was there. So I have some confidence that I have a good understanding of what they were trying to share with me. Whereas an external person, they weren't there. They have a valuable opinion, but they weren't there when I was there. So that helps me to feel more confident. So you have the choice. If you do decide to make those changes, you normally write maybe 1 page or 2 pages, and you talk about the changes that you made. I changed this on page 1, or on page 3, I didn't change such and such a thing because. That's what you would normally do. Then it goes back to the editor. After you've made those changes and after you've explained what changes you made or didn't make, it goes back to the editor. Then at that point, the editor can decide whether to accept, or they can also decide whether to send it back for another review. That's very common. To do two reviews is very common, sometimes even 3 if the reviewers are not satisfied or happy with the changes that you made. So at that point, it's not guaranteed that you'll be accepted even at that stage. But generally we find if you follow the suggestions and you explain yourself very well, you're still quite highly likely to get published. But what happens often at this stage is that people lose confidence. So they think, they read the reviews and they think, they're so negative, and they feel very ashamed or embarrassed. And they think, well, there's no point. It's going to take too much time to make those changes. I'm not going to bother. I'm going to give up, or I'm going to send it somewhere else. But I encourage you to take the advice that you've been given, that free advice, and really use it for your advantage. It's likely that there are experts who have taken the time to read your work. So it's something very, very valuable that we don't often get in life, in fact. So it can go back to the reviewers again. The decision process goes through again 2 or 3 times. And then when the editor is finally happy with what you've done and it's ready, it goes to the publisher proof stage, which is when it doesn't go back to the reviewer, it just goes to the publisher. All they'll be doing is checking the English, checking the grammar is okay. And then at that point, it's can be very, very quick, especially if you have a journal that will publish online first. You know, it's almost a bit of a strange situation because it can easily take maybe 2 years between submitting the first time and finally being accepted. And especially when you're working as an academic, you have so many things to do. Writing is only one. It can be a very, very small part. Isn't that right, Professor? It can be extraordinarily difficult to find the time even to make small changes to your written work because you have so many other things to do. So it can take, for top journals, it can take 2 years. But so you've worked and toiled and stressed and cried and all those things for 2 years. And then all of a sudden they say, oh, it's going to be published next week. And it's a very, very strange feeling. You kind of think, oh, your head is like spinning. But amazing feeling to finally get it out there. You can graduate, you can get promoted, you can share it with your friends, you can share it with your colleagues. Really, really good feeling. Some things to think about when you're asked to make major changes to your work. If you're asked to make major amendments or changes and resubmit to the same journal, you must decide if it's worth your time, as I mentioned earlier. Remember, it is always possible that you'll be rejected again. But you have a choice. It may sometimes be better to submit to another journal, a different journal. But just make sure you withdraw the paper from the first journal before you submit to another. That's more around ethics, the ethics of publishing. You must withdraw your article. You must write to the editor and say, I don't want my article to be considered anymore, before you submit to another journal. Be very, very careful with this. It can be very tempting to submit to lots of different journals because it does take time and you might be under pressure. Don't take the risk with this, not with international journals, because if you think about it, if you're writing on Thai education, in the international arena, there are not so many Thai experts on education. It's very possible that if you submit to this one and to this one at the same time, it will be the same reviewer. That reflects very badly on you and you'll get into a lot of trouble. So don't be tempted to do that. Don't do that. Your reputation in academic life is extremely important. You want to have a good reputation. So be very, very careful. So reasons why articles get rejected. Top 10. So out of scope, that means it's not within the areas that that journal is interested in. That means outside of scope. Out of scope. Not a true academic article. Now, that's a bit tricky to define. There are different types of article. There's different types of research as well. You need to see the kind of style, the kind of depth that the journal you're interested in expects from you. Do they want to have in-depth theoretical developments? Is that the kind of thing they seem to be interested in? You have to read a lot of articles to work that out. Do they seem to be more interested in quantitative or qualitative research? Something to think about. Those are two very different ways of thinking. Are they more focused towards teachers in education, in which case are they wanting to have recommendations at the end, suggestions that you have made from your research? Some journals like that. Some journals hate that and don't want that at all. Actually, in fact, even in my own PhD on citizenship education, my supervisor told me not to write any recommendations at the end because it was an academic piece of work. So that in qualitative research, generally, that's not your job, is to tell people what to do. Your job is to present your findings, and it's for other people to read. So it's a slightly different way of thinking about things. So she said that if I made recommendations, I would be almost contradicting the methodology that I had followed. So you just have to work out with that particular journal what kind of style they prefer. Often articles are rejected because they're too long or too short. And for many of the online submission portals, I suppose, web pages, if your article is too long, it will automatically reject it. You just simply can't submit it. So, and that wastes a lot of time for you because you think that you've submitted it and then you get an email back saying, no, we can't accept it, you need to go change it. So, worth keeping in mind. Some journals are a bit more flexible than others, but as I mentioned, for English language ones, generally the 8,000 words is quite common, including references. Number 4, if an article is not in line with the writing convention or style, it's a tricky one if English is not your first language. But again, it's thinking about the academic language that we use. Have we got the vocabulary right? Have we made sure that our writing is clear, but also has all the kind of technical language vocabulary that we would need to put in there? Sometimes they're rejected because of grammar, punctuation, or English, unfortunately. Sometimes the rejection because it's not clear what contribution your article makes to the subject. When we're doing doctoral work or research in UK, and this may be similar in Thailand, there's a big focus on making an original contribution to knowledge. That's the definition of a PhD, in fact. You have to make an original contribution to knowledge. Your PhD will not pass if it's just a copy of something else. If all of the results are the same, your methodology was exactly the same, your sample group was exactly the same, that's just a copy. That doesn't tell us anything new. For a PhD and for these kind of journals, you need to make your contribution to knowledge very clear. So that might be a well-known theory in education that you've contextualized in the Thai context, for example. That's something that we're really, I would say, desperate for in many ways. A lot of the theories that we use in education come from Western countries. These kind of journals and other academics really want to hear about theories that have been contextualized in other countries. So multicultural education I'm interested in. What does that look like in Thailand? What do the theories look like in Thailand in particular? That would be a very original contribution to knowledge. Or maybe there's a different method that has been used a lot in other countries but never tried in Thailand. That would be an original contribution to knowledge. Those are quite big things. It can be something quite small, but you do actually need to make that very clear, even using the sentence, this article contributes to. Very clear, even in the abstract. Number 7, sometimes rejected because the research is not being contextualized. So that means to the particular country, for example, that you're working in. What does it look like in this particular country? Especially for international and comparative work, you need to do a lot of explanation about the particular country that you're talking about. Especially, so for example, I'm from Northern Ireland, a very, very small country, which is part of the United Kingdom. We have 1.7 million people. So 1,700,000, extremely small. So I imagine you probably don't know a lot about it, and that's okay. I wouldn't expect you to. But if I am writing for an international audience, I need to explain a lot so that people know even the basic information about the country. And it may, I know that Thailand is a large country, but it may be for an international audience, you need to think, well, they probably don't know these basic things about Thailand, so you would need to explain some of that stuff. Number 8, poor theoretical framework or lacks references. So a lot of research coming from the West focuses on theoretical frameworks. It's something you would need to make quite clear. Or a conceptual framework, perhaps. Generally, I think in this kind of research, people need to know where you're coming from. How do you think about the topic that you're studying? It's not something that is necessarily easy to explain, but it's certainly something that a reviewer would want to see. What theories have you been reading about that influenced you when you did that research? Or what things have influenced you? What have you been thinking about? Number 9, messy presentation. So that just means the formatting is really bad. It just doesn't look very good. You know, at the end of the day, I guess it's not so important, but it gives a bad impression if it's untidy, if you're written in an untidy way. And unethical or rude. I'm sure you wouldn't do that. So 10 different ways you could be rejected. So the positive side, of course, is to make sure you don't do those things. So you can think of the opposite of those 10 things or good advice. But what to do if your paper is rejected, and it will happen at some point and perhaps several times, and even when you're an experienced professional, you will still get stuff rejected. So you need to know what you're going to do. First of all, do nothing. It can be very easy when we first receive feedback, even from our advisors. Our emotions can be very strong, can feel very upset. Maybe we want to cry. We can feel very angry, maybe, because we thought we did a good job and we don't agree with what our advisors or reviewers said. That's perfectly normal feelings. Don't worry about those things. But I encourage you look at the feedback and then you put it to one side. When we used to have everything on paper, we would say put it in your bottom drawer. So now you can just put it in a file on your computer somewhere and hide it from you. Try not to think about it for a few days. Almost always when I come back to something a few days later or a week later, it looks a lot better, or it doesn't look as bad as I thought it did. So really basic advice there, but worth keeping in mind. So as I said, you do always have choices here. So you can use those reviewers' comments, those really hopefully precious comments, and alter or change the paper, and you can submit it to another journal. If it's been rejected, that means that's the end for that journal, that particular piece of work. Don't make the changes and then submit to that original journal. As far as that journal is concerned, that article has been rejected, so they won't accept it again. They might accept a new article, something you write differently, but that particular article they won't accept again, so don't submit to the same journal. So if you do submit to another journal, remember this idea of a scope or the aims and purposes of a particular journal. Make sure you change your article, change your paper to fit with that second journal. Don't just submit exactly the same thing. in the same form. Again, remember, it might be the same reviewer that you get. So they're going to be a little bit annoyed if you submit and they see the same work and they already made suggestions and you didn't make any changes. So keep in mind. I suppose it is always important to remember that they are human beings beside all of these processes. You may never meet the people who review your work. You may never meet the editors, but they are real people with real feelings and time and all the rest of it. Well, so yes, keep in mind that you can make changes. For me, as I mentioned, my PhD was in citizenship education when I was living in Northern Ireland, and then I moved to England. And citizenship education is not such a big topic in England, so I wanted to find something that was more relevant to my context. So I've always been interested in migration, so I decided to look at migration and education. So that's the main thing I research now. And because I made that change, it took me some time to start to read all of the right things. It took me some time to know who were the names of people I needed to reference, which were the journals that I needed to access. So I had a situation where I had done this new work with migration in education. And this was in 2016. So I'd collected the data in February 2016, so the start. And I wrote a paper a few months later it was for a conference. I had to write a paper. And, the conference went okay, but it didn't go any further than that. Then I wrote a bit more and I submitted it to a journal a few months later. Was rejected because they said it didn't fit with the aims and scope, so fair enough. Submitted it to another place. They accepted, but with major amendments. And when I was reading the comments, I got a strong sense that they really, really didn't like it. So it was kind of, they felt like they were really giving me a last chance, but I just got a very negative feeling from it. And they asked me to make a lot of changes, and some of them I didn't really agree with. I just felt that they hadn't understood what I was trying to do. And a lot of the work that I do is very in-depth, very small-scale qualitative research, and not everybody likes that. And also I was looking at children's experiences, and there are a lot of people who don't like that and don't think that's important. But for me, that's extremely important to analyze children's experiences if we want to improve education. So I was feeling a bit disappointed, and this was at maybe a year after I'd collected the data at this point, over a year. So I wasn't sure what to do. I wasn't sure if I'd waited a long time to get my reviews back. I knew it was going to be a long process to submit somewhere else. So I was doing other things. I was sitting on it. Then I went to a conference. This is over a year after I collected the data. And I, was networking, and I met someone who was writing a special issue, a special version of a journal. And they said they were writing about children and borders, children and migration, essentially. And my good luck was that someone had recently dropped out. So he had a list of people who were going to write for the journal, and one person had dropped out, and he had a space. So we were talking, and I got the sense that we were thinking in the same line, so he invited me to submit it. So I withdrew from the first journal. I submitted to this new one. I got an internal review, him and someone else. Asked me to make some changes, but I was happy with that because I thought, we are thinking in the same way. They're supportive. So in the end, it still took almost another year, but in the end, I submitted to that journal, and it was accepted and went online. And it's probably the article that I'm most proud of because it was, something personal maybe, something that I really believed in. I felt that the reviewers understood what I was saying and they also believed in the same thing. And then the readers, I've had some really nice feedback as well. So something that started with a lot of rejections and negative feelings, and also me feeling very unconfident because it was a new area for me. Eventually, because I found the right place for it. The journal is called Children's Geographies, in case you're interested. Not an education journal, and that's something to keep in mind. Sometimes education journals might not be the best place for your articles. But in Children's Geographies, they were really interested in children's experiences, and I got it published there. So some rejections and some things I could have given up at any point there. But I managed to persevere, and through support of other people, it was really important. It became something very successful that I could be proud of. Is there anything that you would like me to go over again, or any questions you might have about peer review? I think only a few of you have experience of peer review. Yes, please. True. True, true. Yeah. And did you say at the end you have to pay? Yeah, for some you do. But there are so many journals that you do not have to pay a single penny for. So I know it puts you in a very difficult position, and I guess it just depends what your goals are. You know, like, because in a sense you have to be, if you're not gonna stay in academia, in a sense it doesn't really matter. You're gonna do something else. You don't need your name to be in written form. You just want to pass. That's fine, and I wouldn't judge you for that. But I think if you do want to stay in academia, and if you want to have an international reputation, you do need to think carefully about the types of journal that you publish in, because if you're publishing in ones that don't have a very good reputation, or if you're publishing in ones that people know you must pay, then it can give you a little bit of a bad reputation. I know that sounds a little bit negative, but reputation is very important in academic life, and you really want to have a reputation where people think that you're doing good research and that you're an ethical person as well. So yeah, I wouldn't tell you what to do, but it's something you need to keep in mind. But certainly on the higher level of journal, I mean, these really are the top ones. You don't need to go for these types of ones for sure. But on these kind of ones, there are enough of these that are completely free to submit to that for me, I don't feel I need to pay. Well, I don't have the money anyway, so I don't have a choice. But there are lots of really excellent journals where you should not have to pay a single penny at the moment. So I encourage you to go for those ones, at least as a first resort. Yeah. But some of the top journals, I mean, sometimes they are very quick. Sometimes you get reviews back very quickly. It's just sometimes it can take a long time. So that's why it's worth getting to know the journal, finding other people who have published in the journal, for example. I know that in China, my colleagues were telling me that there's quite a lot of information that people share online about certain journals, Chinese journals, about how long it takes or what the review process is like. I don't know if you have something like this in Thailand, but certainly informal and serious considerations. Thanks for your question. Any other questions about peer review or publishing? You can feel free to ask me at the end as well. Okay, the final thing. Okay, something that many doctoral students in UK are interested in is how to turn their PhD into a number of different articles. If you think about it, a PhD or any kind of doctorate, a master's as well, is such a long piece of writing. You really want to make the most of that, use it in different ways. So a very efficient or effective way of using that is to try and use that research you've done and publish it somewhere. And you already have to do this. But turning a PhD into a chapter in a journal article is a bit more tricky. I have some documents I can send you later. I'm just going to give you the summary of what is in the help sheets, and I'll send them to you after. So there's loads and loads and loads of advice out there on how to turn PhD or master's into journal article. So this is just some advice that I've found. So Australian National University says journal article should be very, very focused. This is in the Western tradition, I suppose. Very, very focused. Broad, not so much. Focused, really, really popular. So PhD can be very broad. You're really trying to cover a lot of stuff. You're trying to convince your advisors that you've done the work. You're trying to convince your examiners that you've done the work. In this case, it's just a small slice, a small bit, must be very focused. So it's very difficult to just, so thinking of cutting and pasting, you can't just cut, say, chapter 3 of your thesis and paste it into an article and send it to a journal. They will notice that immediately, especially if you've written the word thesis or dissertation in it. That happens very often, unfortunately. You need to change it. Even if you have a chapter, often what we use is a findings chapter or a results chapter would be the main part of a research article. But it's not complete on its own. So if you're talking about Thailand, you need to take bits from the rest of your thesis about the context. You need to take a bit from the methods section as well to show exactly what you did. You need to have a literature review in there. So in actual fact, you need to have quite a lot of extra stuff in your journal article compared to a chapter. So you need to add bits from the rest of the thesis to make the journal article sound complete. You can spread your work out in different journals. So one chapter might more or less mean one article, or even more. In fact, you might have a long chapter and there are 2 main ideas in that. That can be 2 different articles. Just make sure that the language is slightly different in each one, and make sure the topic or the focus, the main point, is slightly different. Don't submit exactly the same findings to 2 different articles. We call that plagiarism, self-plagiarism. That means you're copying yourself. So even if you're talking about your work from a different place, you need to reference that properly. So you can spread it out in different journals. So in a qualitative doctoral thesis, often it's quite common to have 3 findings chapters with 3 themes if you're doing thematic analysis. So it's like 3 main topics that you found in your interviews or focus groups. So that can be 3 different articles because it's 3 different ideas. But in each one I'll have something similar about the country context, something similar about the methods. It's just that the words I use need to be slightly different. It can't just be copy-paste. So this is what I mentioned about the contribution. Western research journals really want to know your contribution. What have you added to what we knew before? And there are different ways of doing this. So according to ANU, they say, A, you can approach new evidence in an old way. So you have some new findings, but you're using very common methods or common theories. But you found something new with this particular group of people. They say you can approach old evidence in a new way. So maybe you're using secondary data. Maybe if you have statistics from surveys, someone else has analyzed it. Maybe you have taken those statistics and you want to do something different with it. You want to show, you may want to make a different point. You want to prove something different. Or maybe you found statistical analysis that you thought was wrong, was faulty. Perfectly acceptable to question someone else's data. That would be a contribution to knowledge. Or you can say you compare or put together old evidence with old approaches in a new way. So you might have a different methodological approach. You might want to be more creative with the methods. That would still be a contribution. So even though it sounds like a big deal to make a contribution to knowledge, it sounds impossible. It only needs to be a small thing, a small, slight difference to make it original. Nobody really discovers anything completely brand new just like that in life. It just never happens. It takes time. But you can make small changes, small contributions to knowledge. So that's what ANU says. Another big publisher is called Elsevier, you may be seen before. What do they suggest? Shorten it, definitely. This is the biggest challenge I think that people have, especially when you've written a thesis. It's so long, you spent so much time over it, probably cried over it quite a lot as well. You don't really want to take out words. It's very difficult. But again, it does get easier when you have a bit of distance and time from it. It becomes much easier to delete stuff. So you're probably going to need to shorten your writing. You can use parts of your thesis introduction as your abstract. So that's a little bit of cutting and pasting. That's okay. Remember, the abstract is like an overview or a summary of the research. Normally in a journal article, your method section will be very short, especially if you're using a very common method like survey method or interview method. You don't need to explain everything about surveys. I mean, it gets quite boring, really. So, and you want your reader to be interested. If you're using a different method, an unusual method, a more creative method, and certainly I like to do that, then they need to know a bit more about those methods and how you used it. But if not, make it very short. And in fact, recently when I was turning my PhD thesis into a book, there's no methods chapter at all. So in my thesis, it was 8,000 words, so a full chapter. But in my book, it's like 2 paragraphs, because I used interviews and focus groups, and everybody knows how they work. So, yeah. But that's very easy, because I did my PhD almost 5 years ago, so I don't care about those words anymore. I've written much better words since then, so I don't care about them. I mentioned this earlier, but it's good that Elsevier says this as well. In your article, try to include in your reference list articles from that particular journal. So if you're writing for Compare, put some articles in from Compare, if at all possible. Of course, if you're writing about Thai education and you haven't found anything relevant in Compare, then, you know, it should be natural, not artificial. But it does look good, and I know that many reviewers, when they get an article in, they go immediately to the reference list, partly to see if their name is on it, but also partly to see if the journal is on it. And when I'm doing reviews, I'm looking out for the name of the journal in the reference list as well. So it's just smart if you can put in a few references to that particular journal. And also it's about the citation thing, the ranking of the journals. They want more citations. So even if you're referencing them, that's better for them. So again, it's just about being smart. But also something to keep in mind. Remember that your audience for a journal article is different than for your thesis or your dissertation. You're not trying to convince your advisor or an examiner that you've done the work. It's still an academic audience for these journals, but it's a much wider audience, and they don't need to know every single thing that you have read in your whole life. They just need to know those very particular references, those specialists in your area, and they'll be satisfied with that. So not too many references. You want to be able to read a nice paragraph without like 20 different names in it. It's much easier just to read a long piece of work. So I'll email you these are just advice that I found online, so I'll email it to you afterwards. So to show you what this actually looks like, this is me. So do you have the same thing in Thailand? You print it and get it bound in a book like this? On the left? Same thing? Yeah. So that's just one thesis. 2 copies of one, it's not 2. So that's me in 2014 when I submitted my thesis at Queen's University in Belfast. Really long, 80,000 words, a lot of pages. And then a few years later, this was it was my first one, I think, my first article, first high-level article for my PhD. So my thesis was on citizenship education in Northern Ireland and Israel. And then my journal article in that journal was about one theme in my thesis. It was from one of my findings chapters. So how is it different? So citizenship education in Northern Ireland and Israel within an education rights framework. So I used a human rights law as my conceptual framework. My thesis was 80,000 words. My journal article was 8, so 1/10. And it was called Everyone Has to Find Themselves in the Story, Exploring the Right to Minority Group Representation in Citizenship Curriculum in Northern Ireland and Israel. So it's quite long. But minority group representation, the representation of a minority national group in the curriculum was one of my themes, so I chose that. So the focus with the thesis is big and quite wide. It's still a specialist area, still a niche area, but you have to cover a lot of stuff. So big and quite wide. The focus is small and narrow for a journal article. You still need to set the context, the big picture, but then it sort of goes down into the focus. And then maybe at the end you go out again to talk about implications, wider implications. But it's generally pretty small. And that approach is very popular in these international journals. They really want to see your analytical skills. They don't want to see your descriptive skills. They want to see your analytical skills. So themes in the thesis, I had 3. Minority group representation was just one of them. I saved the others for other articles. In a journal article, there'll be one main theme. So don't try to put everything into a journal article. You won't get the depth that you need. It shouldn't be a summary of the thesis, just one bit. Save the rest for later. The literature review in a thesis is long and detailed, so I needed to think about the 2 countries, their history, conflict, school structure, all that stuff. I needed to prove myself to my examiners so I could pass my thesis and get my PhD. Literature review is much shorter and very selective, so I chose the things that I thought were most relevant. I didn't want it to be boring for people to read. I wanted it to be interesting. But for me, the main thing was to get to the findings, and the discussion was a really interesting thing. So I didn't want to spend too much time on literature in the article. But in thesis, literature had to be very extensive. And the methodology, as I mentioned, I had a whole chapter in my thesis, but in the journal article, just a few paragraphs, just telling them what it was, who were the people that I spoke to was the main thing, and why. Any comments or questions on that process? Does anybody know of anyone who has managed to turn their thesis into some articles? Do you know anybody? Maybe some of your advisors have done that. You should ask their advice, ask them for their experiences. They're the best people, first-hand experience. It certainly takes some time to do this, definitely. But if you really want to publish, it's worth using all of that stuff that you've collected in lots of different ways, sharing it in lots of different ways as well to get the most benefit from it. Okay, I had a couple of tasks for you. I will not do it together now, but when I send you the PowerPoint later, some things to think about. Just as a starting point, thinking about writing a title for your own potential journal article, even if it's your thesis, thinking about a good title. I can send you some advice on that as well. And also writing an abstract, the short summary at the start. Looking at these international journals, thinking about what is in an abstract, what do I need to put in an abstract. Again, just writing some stuff on paper rather than just having in your head can really help to get you started and help with your commitment and motivation. When it's on paper, when you've made a plan, it can be much easier to get started. Okay, I'll send these to help things with you. Okay, so we've looked at the basics today, a lot of stuff. I've given you some advice on how to get started publishing. We thought about how to choose the right journal, general, or niche. Then we talked a little bit about the peer review process, what that involves, what the point of it is, and also how to turn your PhD chapter into a journal article. So my goals at the start, as I mentioned, was to help early career academics like yourselves learn about the process of writing for publication in English language journals and education. And I was hoping to make you feel a little bit more confident. You maybe feel even less confident. Now, I apologize for that. But hopefully you'll go up again. Confident, not so confident, hopefully up again, more confident. And your ability to publish. Because journals like these, like British Journal of Educational Studies and Compare, really want to hear voices from other places. So getting back to those goals, a final thing for you to write to make a commitment. So have a look at those goals that you wrote at the start. You just have a quick look, the goals that you wrote down at the start of the workshop. Did you achieve them? Did you learn what you hoped to? Now I want you to make one concrete goal. I want you to write it down. Make one goal, personal goal for writing. Doesn't need to be for publishing. If you're in the middle of doing a thesis, write a goal. Maybe it's to write 2 pages today. Maybe it's even to read particular literature. I won't ask you. Just write your own goal. Just 1 minute and then we'll finish up. And don't write I hope to, but I will. I will write 2 pages. Not I hope to write 2 pages, I will write 2 pages. Okay, another 20 seconds and then we'll finish up. Okay, I am confident that you will stick to your goals. So there's lots of support out there for you as well as doing these workshops. The publisher that we use, Taylor Francis, has a lot of advice online. You can access all these websites, author services. Other useful references that I find. You remember at the start I said I started to read some books about writing to inspire me, to help me. One thing that I found particularly useful was the 4th one, Air and Light and Time and Space, how successful academics write. So I was trying to learn from other academics how they write in order to help me write as well. The one at the bottom, the productive researcher, I always recommend because it's very important in academic life to maintain your energy and enthusiasm. It's a very difficult job, really, and it can be very difficult to maintain your enthusiasm. So I read a lot about how to be productive, but also to meet your own personal goals as well. Something worth keeping in mind. These are my contact details. Happy for you to keep in touch, and I'll also send you the PowerPoint slides and things for your future. So I wish you all the best, and I look forward to seeing your names in these journals in the near future. Thank you. Thank you for coming this morning.
Very much, Dr. Helen, Hannah, for your insightful knowledge and your valuable time to share with us this morning. And upon this time, maybe we can have 1 or 2 questions, if possible, from the audience.
Is there any?
Seems like they have insight questions. So maybe they may ask you later afterward.
Sure.
Okay.
Of course, yeah. And you can email me as well if you have personal questions about it, for sure. No problem.
So to conclude the seminar this morning, thank you so much for the audience to come and then learn together this morning. I wish and I hope that you can success in your life of academia and also success in your writing and publication in the future. So thank you very much again for coming and have presentation today. And before we separate for our own ways, shall we have a group photo?
Sure.
Yes, together, so that we can have a group photo with the students as well as our staff.
Great. Okay.
Should we come up front or could you come here? And then we do the other side. Selfie เหรอ จะโชว์
ปิดกล้องเลยใช่ไหมปิดแล้วรู้แล้วเอาสองกล้องโอเคเอาการนี้ก่อนนะครับเร็วๆครับไม่เป็นไรเดี๋ยวผมถ่ายโอเคนะครับทุกคนมองกล้องนะครับแคมเมรา one two smile 1 2 you can pose and you can say hey hi 1 2 3